I'll have one or two very short lessons for perhaps the new investors who are not necessarily in Berkshire Hathaway, but people who have entered the stock market in the last year. And I think there have been a record number that have entered the stock market. I like Berkshire, but I think that a person who doesn't know anything about stocks at all and doesn't have any special feelings about Berkshire, I think they ought to buy the S&P 500 index.
I believe you've directed the trustees of your estate to invest substantial assets into the index fund. Isn't that a vote of no confidence to your managers?
Well, no, because we're talking about way less than 1% of my estate. And one thing I'm going to do, incidentally, I mean, all rich people get advised by their lawyers, set up trusts so that nobody can see your will and all that sort of thing. My will is going to be public record, and you'll be able to check at some point what I'm telling you the truth about what is going to get done. But 99.7% roughly of my estate will either go to philanthropies or to the federal government. And before it does it, I think Berkshire is a very good thing to hold. But for a given individual, particularly my wife, I just think that having a tiny fraction, which is all it takes for her to do very well for the rest of her life, I think that the best thing to do is buy 90% in an S&P 500 index fund. Now, the index fund people naturally have started over the time. They market more and more products that go to other indices and everything. So they're really starting to say to the American public, they're saying, well, you can pick what continent to invest in and just buy the whole index. But there's something about every business that if you knew what you wouldn't like. Meat packers or anything. Have you ever gone through a meat packing? If you expect perfection, in your spouse or in your friends or in companies, you're not going to find it. And what you elect to do yourself, if you own an index fund, you're going to own Chevron. And believe me, Chevron is not an evil company in the least. and I have no compunction about owning, in the least, about owning Chevron. And if we owned the entire business, I would not feel uncomfortable about being in that business. Charlie?
Well, I agree. You can imagine two things. A young man marries into your family. He's a English professor at, say, Swarthmore, or he works for Chevron. Which would you pick? 'Cause I don't see. I want to admit I'd take the guy from Chevron.
Well, I hope your daughters agree with you. Berkshire Hathaway owns, by GAAP accounting, more property, plant, equipment, business infrastructure, which the president just got through talking about Wednesday night in infrastructure, the importance of it. We have, measured by GAAP accounting, more than any other company in the United States. We have more than any of those companies that are on the list of the largest companies in the country, but we've got it by a substantial margin. So we have an investment in what makes this country move and work. 15% of the interstate goods move on our railroad. And we're building transmission. And we started in 2006 or 7 planning how we would close coal plants. But you can't close coal plants until you get the electricity from where it's generated to the customer. And if you're going to generate it in Wyoming, and it's going to go to Las Vegas or someplace, and previously they had a coal plant near the place because that was the way it was done 50 years ago or 75 years ago, you better have the transmission. There's no sense having the wind blow in Wyoming and people turn on the lights in Las Vegas. So we went at the transmission plan question a lot earlier than people were talking about it. And we said 16 billion or whatever it was in the annual report that we underway, and we just added 2 billion since the annual report came out. And there's no utility in the country that's coming anywhere close to that.
Well managed, and we're positioning ourselves for the long term. Thanks, Warren.
Yeah, incidentally, I mean, the president the other night talked about 100 billion for infrastructure. We'd love to spend 100 billion on it, but he was talking about, transmission is really the problem. I mean, a big problem, because you got to get from where the sun is shining and where the wind is blowing, essentially to concentrations of population, and it'll be whether you cross state lines and you go through people's backyards. It's whether the federal government has a better luck in just saying this is the way it's going to be done and ramming it down the throats of where they go and getting it done. I mean, they may have that power, and they'll be able to do it faster than we are. On the other hand, we'd love to do it. We'll spend $100 billion. But the speed at which we can do it is, we bought Pacific Corp in 2006, and we had a bunch of customers out in the far west, and they had coal plants serving them. And to change that, you've got to be able to go to where wind blows and deliver it. So but it is interesting that we have published this information. We've spent far more than any utility than in terms of renewables and transmission in the United States. And we started with a nothing, little operation. But the people who bought the stock with their own money, the individuals, they seem to understand it, and they read the reports. And we get calls, and they say, well, we want to come out and talk to you about it. Well, we're not talking to them and ignoring the million people that have been with us over time and bought it with their own money. We will not give special treatment to either to analysts or to institutions over the individuals that basically trust us with their savings for their lifetime.
My biggest concern is around possible losses arising from higher than expected insurance losses. We've seen this in other great companies where underwriting mistakes end up crippling businesses previously considered exemplar. While I understand that Berkshire's culture is unique and the insurance division is full of talented individuals, this is a risk that concerns me. Many of us shareholders feel comfortable now, given the privilege of having Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, and Mr. Jain looking at these deals. However, there will be a day when this is no longer the case. Is it reasonable to think that over the long term, Berkshire should focus on plain vanilla short-tail insurance businesses like Geico and reduce the size of some long-tail risk? I want to clarify that I have the most respect and gratitude for all of Berkshire employees that have built the best insurance group in the world. I'm confident we have this talent to remain leaders in this field for decades to come. This is focused on the inherent opaqueness and risk of some insurance lines.
Clearly, contract certainty is an issue for us in the insurance industry. It is an issue that cuts across not only the long-tail lines that you mentioned, but even short-tail property-focused lines. The most recent example is business interruption, which is an integral part of any property insurance policy that is bought and sold by corporations. It is a risk every time we issue a contract that either because of sloppiness in terms of how that contract is written or because of the regulatory environment we all have to live in, that the words in the contract may be tortured and normally when they are tortured, they end up going against the insurance industry, not in their favor. So it is a risk, it's an unknown risk in terms of how bad it can be. I hope we price for it. When we price for the product, we throw in something for the unknown unknowns, if you will. And we try and aggregate our exposures by major risk categories. Hopefully that'll give us some comfort in terms of having some boundaries on what the exposure really can be. But there's no question the regulators play a very important role in terms of the economics of the business, especially in the US, where there are 50 state regulators who we have to deal with in terms of pricing, in terms of contracts, in terms of...
Most of the surprises in insurance, practically all of them, are unpleasant. I mean,